I don't know if I would want to be a dead person and everybody knows about my pee-pee fetish.
He did tell friends.
I know, but he didn't tell a podcast, man.
I'm Rebecca Lavoie, and this is Crime Writers On, the original true crime review podcast that digs into true crime, pop culture, TV, and other podcasts. And this week, the disappearance of a popular teenager divided a small Texas town. When he turns up dead 2 years later, the mystery gets deeper. We'll review the podcast, Tom Brown's Body. Joining me to get that done is my real-life husband and true crime co-author, former TV journalist, and long-haired soldier, Kevin Flynn. Hello, Kevin.
Hello, Rebecca.
How are you doing this evening?
I'm great. Don't I look good?
No. Also with us is journalist, true crime author, licensed private investigator, certified cat lady, and the one most likely to get enraged by injustice, Laura Bricker. Hello, Laura.
Hello, Rebecca.
You look good, by the way. I can't see you, but
Thank
it's an
you.
assumption that I'm comfortable making.
Well, I gave you all a little surprise that you'll see when you see the video, too.
Oh, can't wait.
And I
Is
can't
it
wait.
your wardrobe?
It wasn't that I flashed the camera, I'll tell you that.
She has like a little Cameron Diaz hair thing going on in the front. And finally, the author behind the noir novels known as the City Trilogy and the host of the Strange Arrivals podcast, our favorite naysayer, Toby Ball. Hello, Toby.
Hello, Rebecca.
All right, well, this does mark the end of an important chapter.
It does.
In our podcasting lives. This episode of Crime Writers On is the season 1 finale of our Facebook watch show, Crime Writers On. And if you've tuned in, thank you. All 10 episodes are available at facebook.com/watch/Crime Writers On podcast. I would say the later episodes are probably a little more polished than the earlier episodes. But you can get reviews each and every week by downloading the Crime Writers On podcast wherever you get your podcasts. So Kevin, with that being said, should we move on and do our first review?
It wouldn't be a podcast if we didn't do that.
All right, let's get it done. 18-year-old high school senior Tom Brown missed curfew the night before Thanksgiving. His truck was discovered the next day, a bullet casing in the cab, but the Texas teenager was nowhere to be found. And when his body turned up 2 years later, it posed more questions than it answered.
Tom's disappearance and death has now been investigated by 4 law enforcement agencies. They've given lie detector tests to Canadian's own sheriff, to a globe-trotting private investigator hired to work on the case, even to members of Tom's own family. Nearly everyone involved in the case has fallen under suspicion.
In the Texas Monthly podcast, Tom Brown's Body, award-winning journalist Skip Hollandsworth explores this unsolved case featuring a defensive sheriff, an offensive private eye, and a Panhandle town pointing fingers in every direction. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about the style of this podcast. It's from the Texas Monthly, a magazine that I know at least some of us have read, and a journalist that I know some of us are familiar with. Toby Ball, what did you think when you heard that Skip Hollandsworth was going to be making a podcast, and a true crime podcast at that?
I was very excited because I've read a bunch of his articles in Texas Monthly, and he's one of the best that's doing it. So it seemed like a can't miss.
I can't miss, says Toby Ball.
Yeah, but it is very, very straight narrative true crime. I mean, it's not more, let's say, literary or journalistic, I think, than a lot of things we've listened to. Laura, what do you think of the delivery of this podcast as a print journalist making a podcast?
Yeah, I think he is like the Texas version of Bill Rankin in his delivery. Because...
Hi, I'm Skip Hollandsworth.
That, to be clear, is high praise.
No, it is high
praise.
It is high praise. So so we have somebody who is very experienced, has been doing this over 30 years, writing these investigative stories, has sources all over the place, but he comes across very straight. It's not flashy. It's told in this kind of traditional true crime format. We're following along as he is going out to start the reporting, as he's going around talking to people. And it's a very thorough, very competent, very in-depth type style of reporting, but it's also not got all the bells and whistles of like something like a Wondery podcast or some of the other podcasts. But this has, much better journalism than, a lot of things that we have reviewed and listened to.
In a lot of podcasts, the host tries to not just insert themselves in the story, but establish like why they're there and make themselves part of this
Right.
narrative. And Skip did it in a way that was more natural than anybody else has.
What do you mean?
Because he actually didn't do that.
Yeah.
He just got in and started reporting, and we hear a lot of his interactions with folks, and he just comes across as being, smart and kind and amusing, but you get a sense of him without him having to say, and I think he probably
I'm
does.
Troy McClure.
Yeah, he probably, he didn't say, well, this is the case that, kept me up at night, and one of those things which sometimes work and sometimes come off as performative, but it was like here's my story. He didn't do that, but you hear him interact with people like the newspaper editor.
Yes. What did you think about that? Because I have to tell you, the one thing, this is not faulting him. He brought her into the podcast and had her sort of set him up. And it sounds like they were in touch before. But there is something about a journalist flying in and doing a local story like this that can go very wrong, right? We've heard that on other podcasts when, like a big podcast host all of a sudden takes a bunch of things that like local papers have been reporting forever and like turns it into a podcast
but not
without
just
adding
but
anything.
Dateline and 48 hours. And there's a lot of journalists that think the most interesting thing about a case is that they're covering it.
Yeah.
So, I think he acknowledged that. And it seems like, though, the people in this town also, in Canadian Texas, it's a funny name.
Yeah.
It is.
It's all those Texas Canadians. Nice
Canadian
horsey.
Texans.
Yeah. They're used to it at this point on this case because it's unsolved and a lot of people have been, nosing around.
One more production question. Did you get the sense, as I did, that some of the recordings we're hearing in this podcast weren't necessarily meant for a podcast, but for notes for a print story?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if they were. They certainly weren't recorded.
Some of them sound like
with
they were
an
recorded. Yeah.
It doesn't sound like it was recorded with a lot of professional audio equipment. Probably, some voice memos on iPhones and other things like that we're not thinking about broadcast or podcast. And so I think that, if there's one technical issue I have with it is the sound doesn't always sound great.
Yeah. Kevin, do you remember how when we used to tape things, when we first were writing books together, we had one of those like little mini Sony tape recorders with tiny little tapes?
Yeah. No, and then I got the one that was digital and it's like, I can download this file and have it forever.
But you can't tell when it's running because you don't see the tape going like ring.
Look at the little clock running.
Hold on, let me turn over this tiny little tape. Well, I just want to summarize the story real quick to orient everybody before we talk about the case and some of the characters. In November of 2016, Tom doesn't come home. His family calls the sheriff. There's a slow response, but the sheriff and also some of the family members drive around town looking for him. They don't find him or his truck. But the next morning, the truck is discovered from a helicopter search, but there's no body in the truck. It's parked outside of town at a water treatment plant. The sheriff and the family argue about whether or not the truck is a crime scene and should just be returned to the family, as the sheriff wants to do, or should be processed. The family hires a private eye. Later, Tom's backpack is found, and the question is, did he leave town on his own? Did he die by suicide? Or is there some other explanation? Perhaps he was in a relationship, or perhaps he was sort of part of some underground scene, or perhaps he came to his end via foul play and was kidnapped and or murdered. So that's kind of where we are in the podcast. And we do have some extremely interesting characters. I should clarify, we say the word characters a lot. We know we're talking about real people, but we're basically talking about central figures in the story. Laura Bricker.
Yes.
All I could think about when I was listening to this podcast, especially around this Sheriff Lewis, was... thank goodness Laura Bricker has a new person to hate that isn't Doug Evans from In the Dark. What did you think of Sheriff Lewis? He was very brash. He sort of introduces himself to Skip, talking about wanting to get into law enforcement because he loved, quote, kicking down doors.
Yeah.
And then he has just a very particular sort of way of being that I imagined rubbed you the wrong way. Am I right?
Yeah. It was definitely this sort of entitled law enforcement personality that comes across as not very helpful, not very sympathetic, and definitely the type of person that if he was in my area, I would find a way to poke him a little bit and antagonize him because he kind of irritated me.
Did you buy his version of an earlier traffic stop with Tom Brown and his friends where they were hanging around town? Or did you buy Tom's mother's version, which would basically characterize Sheriff Lewis as being the kind of law enforcement officer that
lies,
hassled kids and enjoyed that power and lies? Yes.
Yeah, that was...
And it wasn't in his jurisdiction.
Yeah.
At the time, he was working for a different county and was passing through and said, I'm going to go investigate, and didn't tell the local sheriff about it.
It's like Boss Hogg. God, this guy. Yeah, that really was just out of line. And I think what struck me about that is that everybody's description that knew Tom talks about Tom being such a good kid. If Tom's late for his curfew, he calls. He's got a reason. He's right there. He's like very trustworthy. So that version of Tom did not gel with this version of what happened when, Boss Hogg went out and decided to do his own little investigation there.
Yeah, and Sheriff Lewis later says that when he ran into Tom later, Tom apologized to him.
No.
Kevin, what are your thoughts on Sheriff Lewis?
Well, I was just going to say, that's like the one thing. I believe Tom is a very polite young man, but I don't believe the sheriff's version that he came over and, I lied to my mom. I'm sorry. It was really bothering me this whole time. I had to get it off my chest.
So your thoughts on Sheriff Lewis generally?
He's okay.
You say in your notes, I think Sheriff Lewis is a do you stand by that?
Do I stand by that?
That's a tough call for Wayne on
Yeah.
It's right on the margins.
Wayne's like, oh man, I'm glad I waited to this final episode for everybody to start using the word. Yeah, he doesn't come off very sympathetic, and certainly while the PI, and we'll get to him, has his own sort of credibility issues and likability issues, it's very obvious. I mean, Skip kind of lays it out without having to lay it on thick that there was not a lot correct done about the early part of this investigation.
So, Sheriff Lewis, we are introduced to a second character, the private detective, Mr. Klein. Toby, what do you think of these two characters, sort of the central investigators that we're introduced to in this story?
Well, I kind of agree with Kevin's assessment in that I don't think either one of them are guys I'd particularly like to hang out with. The detective, Klein, you can see, like, you get a sense of his kind of charisma, I guess, or just the way he relates to people, because they do have a fair amount of audio of him, interacting with people, asking them questions or whatever. And you can see that he's engaging in kind of a way that I think I would find kind of off-putting, but apparently does put people, get people to talk to him. I mean, it seems like he's successful. I think
he says he is.
I
hate
that guy.
Well, what was interesting though is that they, people were like, oh yeah, he came in, it was like this, that, the other thing. I did this, I did that. And then the one time you do hear him kind of bragging about stuff, it's pretty low key. It's like, oh yeah, Malaysia, that was me. This is me. There's like, really?
Olivia Newton-John's husband.
Yeah. Just stuff like that.
Didn't you also find the stuff where he's talking to kids like, yeah, you're welcome to my world. I'm on the dark side all the time.
Right. Welcome to my world. I do this for a living. You won't meet guys like me very often, or I pray you don't. We live in a very dark world. Worse than you'd ever dream. We've seen it all. And then the phone rings, and we see one more.
I was just like,
we're all guys here.
Yeah, that's how I felt.
But he's talking to like 16, 17-year-old football players. They're probably just like, this guy's a real life detective. This
guy's a real life
But he's also just wrong. I mean, he's wrong about basic things. He's like, back page, that's the real dark web. I'm like, no, it's not.
Well, that's
it's
the
literally,
weird.
I mean, it's a place you can go get like a sexy massage or whatever, but it's not like the Silk Road where you're buying heroin.
But it was for. But I think that was
Rebecca.
for like prostitution, right? I mean, that was the whole.
Yeah,
that's what
but it's well known.
Lost
it's
Girls
not like,
was about.
Yes, but he makes it sound like no one's ever heard of it.
Right.
And it's like some mysterious world that, only he has access to. I'm like, it's literally a website anybody could go to.
It's like 4chan,
Philip?
but it's 8chan.
Well, that was kind of the weird thing I thought, and I don't know if I'm jumping ahead, so you can stop me. But
jump ahead, do it.
the diaper thing.
Yes.
The diaper thing.
So just to kind of summarize it, it seems like he had like this weird diaper fetish, and
Tom did. Yes.
Tom did, and it didn't seem like it was something he was doing a whole lot. And some people didn't know about it, and some people did, and apparently he may have felt a little bit guilty about it. But it seems like both Sheriff Lewis and PI Klein kind of latch onto that, and the conclusions they draw from it are bizarre.
Like what?
Well, Klein starts talking about Backpage.com. Like, he thinks like that's the key. Lewis decides that Tom's probably gay, and it's like, where do you come up with that? Because he's got a diaper fetish. It's just it's bizarre. And then they both seem to think like this is the key,
Right.
at least to a certain extent. And again, like if it was a detective novel and you're like, well, his quirk must be the key to the thing. But quite honestly, that seems like, because a guy has a diaper fetish, does not seem like the kind of thing that's going to have him disappear. Right. I just have a hard time having that follow. Like, you should look into it, but the idea that that's your key, like, piece of insight into him seems way, way off. And sort of the product of, like, I guess just super conservative thinking. I don't know.
But it begets the question, if we agree that maybe the diaper kink, I might call it a fetish. It just sounds like a kink.
It was a habit.
If the diaper thing is not terribly salient to the investigation, then should it be salient to this story?
Yes. I think
Because
so.
I'm a little, I see it both ways.
Right.
Are we talking about, I think it's legitimate because it was legitimate to the investigation.
It led them down the wrong path.
It ran down the wrong path. But if your theory is that he was ashamed of himself and that's why he committed suicide, if it was suicide, then that's one thing. If you're saying, well, it was more than just something he liked to do, he wanted to explore something more dangerous and he put himself in an at-risk situation and he's murdered, that too, both of them seem like they're a little out there given the circumstances, but I think that Skip does an okay job with this subject matter. But it's like, oh man, I don't know if I would want to be a dead person and everybody knows about my pee-pee fetish.
But he told people. He did tell friends.
I know, but he didn't tell a
But here's the
podcast,
thing.
man.
So, I don't know about you guys. I looked up the adult diaper thing.
Yeah.
You did?
Yeah, I
What-
did. Because I actually just recently read a book where that was a minor plot.
Hold on,
Well, that
tell
was
me,
that
what was the
astronaut
website?
Case.
Well, that was a little different. I think
yeah.
she just didn't want to pee driving across the country before she stalked those people. But yeah, it's actually it can be a sexual fetish where somebody is turned on by the idea of being taken care of like a baby.
Yeah.
It can also be a physical comforting thing that has a lot to do with just like similar to the way that some people who have sensory issues like to wear clothing that is very soft or very tight or very loose. Like it can be a sensory thing. It's not super aberrant. It's not like super common.
Yeah, I don't think it's bad. I think it's okay.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't point to anything nutty.
No.
But the point of including
it doesn't make him a deviant if people
Right.
want to put that label
Right.
on him. That's wrong.
the
But
point of
that's-
including it is to show that the investigators over-focused on it. Right, Toby?
Well, I was going to say it doesn't make him deviant, but I don't think the detectives realize that, right?
Yeah. Can we just say shout out to the two young women in the podcast who talk about knowing about the diaper thing and just don't seem to care that much about it? The one girl who's like, you do you, man. Like, it's fine. I'm like, it really speaks to, even in the Panhandle of Texas, that young people are just a million times smarter than old people when it comes to acceptance
Yep.
and inclusivity. I don't know. That really struck me. Laura, did that strike you too?
Yeah, because I think we are hearing, these sort of, the adults in this story are going with sort of the stereotypes of, well, he broke up with his girlfriend and he quit the football team. Well, he must be gay and he must be suicidal. And then you have the young people who are clearly like, no, he was just like ready to do something different. And, they broke up, but they were still friends. And, he sent her this very nice note and everything. And they, so I think the young people were a lot more accepting and a lot more just sort of rolling with who people were and not getting caught up in these sort of stereotypes that, when you hear the adults that are investigating this going down that road, it's not taking them toward actually solving this case.
Laura, I'm curious as to your opinion when we hear that Penny in her interview with police, this is right after Tom has gone missing. I believe it's the next day at the police station. She's there. She's interviewed second. His dad is interviewed first, and then she's interviewed second. And she, tells the police that one of the things that's occurred to her is that perhaps he died by suicide. It runs in her family, and she knows that a lot of teenagers, can commit self-harm or die by suicide. And then she talks about the detail, having checked to see if there were any missing guns in their house, and there weren't. And then she says, I figured if it happened, it may have been a result of the choking game. So she kind of gives a bunch of details about how in her mind she imagined it could have potentially happened. What did you make of that?
Well, I think when something like that happens and you're a parent, you're probably grasping at straws trying to figure out what could have happened. I mean, there's this, panic feeling, this fear, what's going on. And, I was thinking about, cases I'd covered as a journalist where, it wasn't the choking game necessarily. It was back when the thing to do was, fill the plastic bag with all of the nitrous oxide from the, whipped cream containers or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
And then go in, put that over your head while you were, this is Facebook, having some fun with yourself. And
self-pleasuring.
But in one case that I covered, this young man, he was home from college. He went in like the closet behind, like, you know how you have that closet with the crawl space. And he actually accidentally killed himself doing that. So that's what I was thinking of when she was saying that, as I was thinking, that is something that, you might be surprised. And in the case that I covered, it was a kid that was like, somebody that was like an Eagle Scout or something, somebody that you're like, wow, this is not how I anticipated this person going. So when she was talking about that, I was thinking, well, that does seem pretty out there, but I don't know.
It doesn't explain the truck and the bullet and the no body being around.
But I was just going to say,
Toby.
One thing that story brings up, which I was thinking about when you were talking about Sheriff Lewis and the kids in front of the theater, and how everybody said, what a good kid Tom was, and that can be true, but you can also, but even good teenage kids, like quote unquote good teenage kids, get up to doing some pretty weird stuff, and it doesn't make them not good. It just makes them teenagers. Yeah. So it kind of would the sense you get from listening to it is here was this like really, really good kid who had this diaper thing. And that's basically what he was into drama, quit the football team, had a girlfriend. But that's sort of your sense of him. And everyone's like, oh, he never drank, he never smoked, he never did this or that.
Never missed curfew.
It's always a
when you think it's probably,
driver.
Again, and we talked about this before, where I think it's hard with victims to really give a well-rounded sense of thing, because nobody's going to be especially like teenagers who've known him all his life aren't going to be like, yeah, that dude rages on weekends. This is not
like Toby does.
Yeah.
But I believe the curfew thing because they looked for him immediately. Like they knew immediately something was wrong, and being a parent to a kid who's like that, who's just like really good, like, and does everything he's supposed to do, like I would immediately look, you know what I mean? So I kind of believed that stuff around Tom in a way that maybe I would be more, less inclined to when I hear descriptions of other victims.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I think you can be home on curfew.
Yeah.
And, be out drinking and just make sure you're home on time or doing whatever it is you're doing. And again, it's not being judgmental. That's just I've got teenagers as kids. I know
Yeah.
this is kind of the way it goes.
So I do want to talk about another detail of the case, because I was very relieved when we hear, it was fascinating, by the way, to have all of the sightings of Tom's truck, because we have a very clear TikTok.
Yeah.
Yes, a very clear TikTok of the folks that were out looking for him. His friend Christian was out looking for him. His mom was out looking for him. His brother was out looking for him. The sheriff was out looking for him. And they talk about driving around to all the places he likes to go, Tom's Loop, all the places they hang out, the abandoned motel or hotel, was it, that his friend went to. And it seems like his truck was seen on video throughout the town kind of during this period of time in such a way that it's surprising they didn't cite him on the road or cite the truck on the road. But the interesting detail is one of the final sightings before they see the truck driving into the water treatment plant is that it was driving toward his house and then a few minutes later away from his house. And I was so relieved to hear Skip say, maybe we're asking the wrong question. Maybe he wasn't driving the truck. Mm-hmm. Kevin, what did you think about that? Because all I could think about when I heard about a shell casing in the truck was that perhaps a gun had been fired from inside the truck to outside the truck, and it would make a whole lot more sense if somebody other than Tom was driving the truck.
Yeah. Now, are you ready to hear some stuff that we're going to hear later on that we know it's in the public record?
It's a real case, so I don't mind you spoiling it.
Right. Laura, are you ready?
I'm ready. I can't wait, Kevin.
Grab your panties, because...
It's crazy.
Yeah. So we'll find out later that when Tom's body is discovered, it was discovered by a sheriff's deputy. Found deep in the woods. The deputy says he was out that deep in the woods looking for deer antlers.
While on duty.
This was the same deputy that was on duty the night Tom disappeared, and took his brother or family member out to look for him.
It is his brother, yeah.
And declined to take, and the brother pointed to a dirt road where there was a gate that's usually locked and was open, and said we should go down there, and the deputy said, declined to do that, and it was down that road that led to where the car was, that the truck was. That deputy was later fired for some sort of misconduct.
Looking for antlers while on duty?
Yeah. So the body has been recovered, and according to the stuff I found, the manner of death and cause of death have never been released.
His body was found 2 years later.
Wow.
Yeah. And when the detective guy went into the truck, they sprayed luminol and said that it lit up. So, I want to see what Skip has to say about all that. But Laura, I'm afraid that you're just going to lose your goddamn mind.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
I'm going to lose my mind.
Laura, you should stop listening to this podcast.
No, I need to get...
You're going to have a stroke.
I don't want to have a stroke, but I need to get my rage walking going again. So this is like just the thing to do this, I think.
You're going to burn so many
I'm going to need some new rage sneakers. Like my sneakers are going to burst into flames.
All right. Well, I think we should do what we do. What do you think, Kevin?
Why not?
Well, before...
Wayne is like, thank God
yes,
these guys
God,
are
it's
done.
over.
Bye,
I'm not going to say
Wayne.
again.
Bye, Wayne. Here's a little for you, Wayne.
Well, before we get to our thumbs up or thumbs down reviews, if you want to hear an expanded discussion plus a bonus review of season 2 of Netflix's crime drama Criminal UK, subscribe to the Crime Writers On podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And please like and follow us right here on Facebook and Instagram. Tell us your review of Tom Brown's body in the comments. And of course, you can join our amazing community of listeners and fans in our official Crime Writers On Facebook discussion group. There's a button to join it like right over like there or there, depending on the orientation of Facebook. There. Anyway, for exclusive podcasts and more, you can also join us on Patreon at patreon.com/partners in crime media. So let's do what we do. Let's let our listeners know and our viewers know. Should they check out Tom Brown's Body, the new true crime podcast from Texas Monthly. Laura Bricker, what do you think about Tom Brown's Body? Thumbs up or thumbs down?
This is a thumbs up. I think that, I was super eager to listen to this just because of the reputation of Skip, the journalist, and his work for Texas Monthly magazine. And knowing that you have somebody with that depth of experience and level of sources and just somebody that has been covering these type of stories for so long in this region, I feel like we are going to have a satisfying conclusion in terms of the information that we're getting. And I think he's setting it up. It's not flashy, but it's setting up a story that I want to hear what happens next. And, I am always drawn to these small town sort of stories. And you really get the sense of that small town when he's out with the newspaper publisher who knows everybody everywhere. It could be any town if you live in a small town when you hear the setup. So I am eager for the next episode. Big thumbs up.
Toby Ball, what about you? Thumbs up or thumbs down for Tom Brown's Body?
Yeah, I agree with almost everything Laura said. I'm a big thumbs up. I was super psyched to listen to this. Again, having read Skip Hollandsworth's, a lot of his articles in Texas Monthly. I think it's fun to kind of listen to him go about doing his business. The stories interesting. It's got some good larger than life Texas personalities. I think they do a good job of setting the scene and giving you a sense of the community in which this takes place. And it's also, we didn't really talk about this. I guess we touched on it a little bit, but I mean, the kids come through as being like remarkably mature and compassionate, and and that's not always. I guess we don't hear a lot from teenagers in the stuff that we review, and this just seemed, I don't know. It seemed to deal in their conversations in a very sort of realistic and kind of responsible way. So long way of saying I really enjoyed it. Thumbs up. Looking forward to continuing to listen.
I agree. Teenagers are the best people. Kevin Flynn, what about you? Thumbs up or thumbs down for Tom Brown's Body?
I'm going to go thumbs up. I think that Skip Hollandsworth is the podcaster we deserve right now. Look, I mean, he brings a lot of gravitas to this and a very comfortable demeanor. He really slipped right into this role. It feels more like we're following along on The Gathering for a magazine article and not a podcast, which is what we often get, right? I think the story in and of itself is interesting enough. It's a good pick. Doesn't need a lot of embellishment. I would say on the editing side, I already said that some of the audio is difficult to hear at times because it doesn't sound like it was gathered with professional audio equipment, which it really should have been. And also, there's a lot of it. And I think they probably could have, edited some of the stuff to keep, like when we hear the private detective, Mr. Klein, talk to everybody. I don't know if we had to hear him talk to everybody. So I think in that way it could have been tighter. But those are nits to pick. I think this is it's great, and it's about time that Texas Monthly got into the true crime podcast game because they're built for this.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with everything you said. So I have nothing else to say except that in addition to him being the Bill Rankin, perhaps, of Texas, he also reminds me a little bit of one of my favorite Texas reporters, Wade Goodwin, correspondent for NPR, who has a singular storytelling style that I also really, really love. So yeah, I'm a fan of Tom Brown's Body. Could it have been tighter? Sure. Could it have been more professionally recorded and, mixed a little bit more like a podcast rather than like a magazine article sort of narratively? Yes. But it's a great story. It's a bananas story, and I can't wait to hear the next chapter. I will keep listening. Big thumbs up for me for Tom Brown's Body. Now it's time for my favorite part of this podcast, a little something I like to call the crime of the week. Yay, science!
Yay, science!
A Memphis, Tennessee 12-year-old has successfully achieved nuclear fusion in his basement. Is that what you call it? Young Jackson Oswalt used open source technology to build a device which fused 2 deuterium atoms. Yes, I did look up how to pronounce that. He says his family and friends didn't understand what his new hobby was all about and probably should have asked whether the house would be consumed in a mushroom cloud. Although not an easy task, deuterium fusion creates a low level of heat and energy. A nuclear physicist verified fusion had been achieved, and the 2021 Guinness Book of World Records says Jackson is the youngest person to do it. It's quite a feat for the preteen, considering we can't even get our kids to clean their stupid rooms.
It's true.
So, panel, here's my question for you. Jackson is going to totally ace his science fair. But what about you? What was your greatest science fair achievement? Laura Bricker, what do you think?
I never had a greatest science fair achievement. I was so bad at it. The closest thing was like a science fair fail in college when I experimented with feeding our houseplants beer, and that just don't do it.
What happened to the
It
plants?
smelled so disgusting. One day we're like, why is our plant dying? And I'm like, probably because we've been feeding it beer. And then I like went to pick it up and like move it outside, and I'm like, oh my God. And that was the end of that. So
You overwatered it.
yeah, exactly.
Just needs a little bit of hops and barley.
Yeah.
Toby Ball, what is your greatest science fair achievement?
I brought a dead gerbil back to life with car battery and some jumper
Really?
cables. Yeah.
No, you didn't.
I got a B.
He's
No, we
lying.
didn't.
I got a B.
We didn't have. I don't recall having a science fair.
Yeah.
At any time in my youth. We did have a plant that we fed beer, and its
You did too?
leaves fell off one by one until it was like some kind of like miniature tree that had these big like
That's what mine
tropical
was.
leaves on it. And they just kind of fell off one by one until at the end it was just this like stalk. It's not a good look for a plant. So
Kevin Flynn, your greatest science fair achievement.
Well, your greatest science fair achievement is actually supposed to be your kid's assignment that you have to do.
Yes.
And there was one year in junior high school where Lily had to make like a Rube Goldberg contraption, and she wanted it to hit a button on her iPhone so it would play a song by One Direction. And it was so bad. I was cobbling together like bits of toys and marbles, and it never worked. And then like I went to the science fair, and like some father like made a rocket that like hit the ceiling, and I'm just like, give me a break. So I didn't get a good grade.
My best science fair achievement was lying that I had my period to avoid going to the science fair.
Okay.
True story.
social
Science.
engineering.
True story. Well, that is going to do it for us. If you're still watching this episode, you're either our parents or you work for Facebook. Thanks, Mom and Dad. And thanks to Wayne from Facebook, who has spent hours and hours of his life waiting to see if I would say, mother. On behalf of all the crime writers, thanks so much for watching. Until next time, we will catch you later.
Everybody wave to the camera. Bye.
Bye.